you very much, and good afternoon from Helsinki. I'm really honored to have this opportunity to talk about the Finnish basic income experiment, which was conducted in 2017 and 2018. So there are a number of unique features with this experiment, and one of them was that this experiment was actually implemented by a conservative coalition government. Currently, we have a government with five female party heads, but then we had three male party heads, and normally basic income as an initiative has been supported by left-wing parties and green parties, but those were not in power when the basic income experiment in Finland took place. So I will first talk about the labor market context of the experiment and then also the social security context of the experiment. So as many countries, we are facing rapid population aging, which put pressure on public finances, and our participation rates have not been very, very high. So incentives to work, they've been a major political theme for a long time. But there still has been quite modest investment in active labor market policy measures, and we know that those measures are not always effective in activating participants, especially those who have facing multiple obstacles to labor market. So the main theme of this experiment was to improve labor market incentives and increase labor market participation. Another issue is that if we have a country which already has an social security system which is closest to basic income, I would argue that it is actually Finland, since we have every legal citizen has an entitlement to basic amount of social assistance, and that amount cannot be sanctioned completely. It can be reduced by 20 or 40%, but only for two months. So you could say that we already have a kind of a basic income system in place. Of course, that's not unconditional, but we have this guaranteed income system, and that also includes full support for a rent. So in that sense, Finland has already a system which is quite close to basic income, or actually is a system of guaranteed income. So some words about the features of the experiment. I think what's really the most unique feature was that this was the first national basic income experiment which was implemented through passing a law. So most of the other experiments, they are based on random sampling or on self-enrollment, but this was implemented through passing a law. So the experiment period was 2 years, and the first results were just released before the end of the government mandate period, and the final results were released in 2020. And currently there are more results coming from the experiment. So this experiment, it raised a lot of international interest. And there were all sort of misunderstandings around the experiment. So this was not a full basic income experiment or universal basic income. This was just a partial basic income experiment focusing on those who were long-term unemployed. Of course, we didn't have the possibility to evaluate dynamic or system level effects. So we didn't have any kind of a saturation side as there was in the city of Manitoba in the previous minimum income scheme in Canada. And then what's also important to emphasize that this randomized controlled trial setting was in place only to study the employment outcomes, but not the subjective well-being outcomes. We didn't have a baseline survey, and I will come back to that in a moment. So here the experimental setting. So we had 2,000 people in the control group, in the experiment group, and all those who were getting the social assistance unemployment benefit. or flat rate unemployment benefit, they were the control group, so 173,000 persons. And everybody was getting the same amount. For those in the experiment group, that was unconditional, and for those who in the control group, it was treatment as usual, so it was conditional. The target population was between 25 and 58, so we didn't want to include people who were really young and supposed to be studying, or those who were really close to the retirement, and duration was 2 years. So as to the employment outcomes, we were able to utilize monthly register data, so very reliable register data, and we were basically testing 3 different overlapping mechanisms. One was, firstly, it was the income disregard. So those who were in the experiment group, they were able to keep the basic income even if they would get a job. So there were huge incentive to increase income from work. Then there was absence of sanctions. So if those who were getting basic income, they were not forced to participate in any active labor market policy measures or for example, training. And thirdly, there was an absence of bureaucracy. So there was no need to report incomes or to be concerned about possible paybacks of excess benefits in case of getting income from work. So the hypotheses to be tested were that since there was the income disregard, better incentives for work, they would have an improved employment. And secondly, for absence and sanctions and bureaucracy, people may become lazy and stop seeking employment, or that people may release their employment potential when those mandatory measures and evil bureaucracy were removed. But basically, the expectation was that there would be improvement in employment. So the first year results actually didn't show any change in employment. So as you see from this table, for those in the treatment group, on average they were working almost 50 days, and in the control group it was almost the same. So there was no statistical difference between the treatment group and the control group. Why I'm talking about the first year result is that during the second year, another employment measure was implemented, something which was called the activation model, which was a sanctioning regime or a sanctioning policy. And that was really detrimental for the experiment, since it actually meant that it was not possible to study the employment effects for the second year. And it also showed that the government was not really keen on implementing any kind of a basic income policy, since they completely changed direction when implementing this activation model. So the final results were that there was only an increase of 6 days of work in the treatment group. But what's important is to say that this was an effect, the joint effect of the basic income experiment and the activation model, since the activation model was implemented during the second year of the basic income experiment. And the final conclusion from the research group was that this huge carrot included in the basic income model did not actually work in increasing employment. A second quite surprising result was that people, they were not forced to participate in any active labor market policy measures. But still, the majority of people getting the basic income, they wanted to participate in those measures, which seemed that they didn't have a problem with the conditionality of employment services. So some basic income advocates say that people are very negative about active labor market policy measures and take them as a kind of a sanctioning policy or a welfare to work arrangement. But that was not the case in Finland. So people actually registered for the active labor market policy measures, even though they were not, even though they did not have to do that. Then we also studied the well-being effects or the subjective well-being effects at the end of the period. And the survey was conducted just 2 months before the end of the experiment period, and the survey studying a wide range of subjective well-being measures showed a significant difference between the key indicators representing different aspects of subjective well-being. So basic income recipients, they assess their well-being way more positively than the respondents in the control group. So there were higher generalized and institutionalized trust. There was increased confidence in the future, better self-confidence, less symptoms of less symptoms of depression, and better cognitive function. Also, the perception of financial well-being among the basic income recipients was better. They also experienced less bureaucracy. So overall, a wide range of positive outcomes. Of course, there was a kind of a caveat since there was no baseline survey, and there was a very low response rate in the control group. So only 20% answered the survey. So there is a possible selection mechanism, and also what's need to be taken into account that since this very unpopular activation model was introduced, that also contaminated the control group and the treatment group, which might have resulted in some selection effects. But summary of the results is that there was no or very little effect on employment, but a positive view of the active labor market policy measures and also positive experience of the basic income in the survey. These results are very much in accordance with the results from other experiments implemented in other countries like Canada, US, Netherlands, or the city of Barcelona in Spain. So there is a greater effect on well-being than on employment. So why there was such a minor change in employment? I think it's that the fact that the financial incentives, they play a role, but alone they are not enough to significantly promote labor market participation. And since this was an experiment focusing on long-term unemployment facing multiple obstacles to open labor markets, so this just one change in financial incentives was not enough to improve their situation. Some other learnings or lessons from the experiment was that there was a quite small experiment budget. So that's why it was not possible to study the effects of basic income in more detail. There are also some other issues concerning how the payment was made. So, for example, we have a child supplement in basic unemployment compensation, and that was not included in basic income. But perhaps the biggest caveat or biggest network was this new activation model, which was highly unpopular, and it caused citizens' activism and aggressive protest, and that had an effect on the second year results. So as finally some words about the future of basic income in Finland. Currently we have a parliamentary committee discussing a major overhaul of our social security system. Basic income is not studied there, but this reform could implement elements of partial basic income or something which is called participation income, a policy which is quite similar to basic income, but it's not unconditional. So there is a condition that you'll contribute somehow to your community. It doesn't need to be a labor market participation. It can be voluntary work, for example, and that'll give you entitlement to participation income. There has been also calls for new experiments, especially experiments studying the bureaucracy, the so-called bureaucracy traps. So I think this basic income compared with the expectations, I think it was a disappointment. But in the long run, and if you just think about incremental reforms, I think this was one minor step towards less means testing and towards less conditionality in our minimum social security system. That's all from my side. I think I have already gone through the summary, so I'll thank you for your attention and look forward for discussing this topic further. Thank you.
Yeah.